We're going to be going over the review sheet on imperialism in World War I. And we start our first column, arguments in favor of and against imperialism. This was a class that we had together. Remember those days? I remember those. So, arguments in favor of imperialism is that it's necessary to have worldwide naval bases. And then another point is that the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. And the arguments against it, we see that it violates the Declaration of Independence. And that it is hypocritical. We're supposed to be a nation of laws and of rights, and here we are taking away rights of people. Okay, going on to U.S. policies towards imperialism. We have the open door policy. We have the Roosevelt corollary. Corollary, and this is also called the big stick policy. So I put those both on the review sheet just as a reminder. I think that's supposed to be oh, that's my problem. Okay, then we also have dollar diplomacy and the Monroe Doctrine. Territorial gains during this time. We have Cuba, influence over Cuba. We're not an all-out takeover. The Panama Canal, Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. Moving on to the Spanish-American War, the causes of that, we have jingoism. We have the USS Maine and the sinking of that. Oh, this was another lesson we did together. All right, I miss you guys. Yellow journalism. And the DeLome letter where they insulted our president. How dare they? And the effects of this war is the Treaty of Paris. And this was the United States gained colonies, like influence over Cuba. This took us into a brutal war with the Philippines, which eventually we took over, and we also got Guam at that point. So I don't know if this was in the list of terms, but it's kind of important. And I guess it's really an answer to this question here. How was the war a turning point in American foreign policy? Well, now we're a colonial power. So that's something that you might want to put down there for the people who are actually listening to this. And I can't see how many people listen, just so you know. Okay, causes of World War I in Europe. So I made these two different columns because they're two different developments. This is happening in 1914. And the United States doesn't get involved until 1917. So there are different reasons why these things happen, and you should be aware of that. So we're talking about World War I in Europe. We could say imperialism. Oops, I'd really like to make this red and not underlined. Imperialism. We have the Central Powers. We have the Allied powers. So we have secret alliances. We've got the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. We have nationalism and militarism. The United States gets involved for an entirely different reason. We got involved because we were upset that with the use of U-boats and the violation of freedom of the seas. We have the sinking of the Lusitania. The fact that we loaned billions of dollars to the Allies. The use of the U-boats, as I mentioned. The Zimmerman Note, a classic reason to get involved in war. No one can forget that one. Okay, then making the world safe for democracy. And this is the idea that Wilson said in his speech to Congress when he asked them to declare war, saying it's important for the United States to do this, to make the world safe for democracy. But remember, we're not fighting communists. We are fighting imperial powers. And the Russian Revolution took place, where Russia, for a short period of time, became a democracy. The Russian Provisional Government was democratic. And so that's when we got involved. And then propaganda was another reason. Remember, we were getting our news from Britain, and they made the Germans look bad, and so we were angry with Germany. But we had other ideas about Germany too, the use of the U-boats, and then the threat of German domination. In general, was a scare. If they took over all of Europe, they controlled the Atlantic Ocean, what would become of the United States? So in the United States itself, on the home front, we had to prepare for war. So the government expanded its powers and became very involved in the economy, and they limited the rights of free speech with the Espionage and Sedition Acts. And that takes us to, of course, the Schenck case, Schenck v. U.S., where they said it's okay, that speech can be limited if it poses a clear and present danger. The government sold war bonds to raise money, which they called Liberty bonds. They passed a Selective Service Act, which is another name for a military draft, like they're selecting you for service. They formed the War Industries Board, which was going to settle labor disputes so people wouldn't go out on strike, so the government could get the necessary coal and oil that it needed. And this was going to lead us into the 1920s with the Red Scare, because once the Soviet Union turned communist in 1919, there was a concern. Actually, that was later, earlier in 1917. But once that happened, there was a concern that communism would come over to the United States. So let's say into the 1920s. So this is not really during the war, but it's related. And then the impact of World War I, of course, we start off with Wilson's 14 points, the idea of self-determination. But that didn't go over so well, and we have the Treaty of Versailles signed instead. That included a war guilt clause saying, Germany, this is all your fault, and you've got to pay us a lot of money. Well, the Europeans had to be paid a lot of money, and that's called reparations. And then when Wilson brought back this, it also included the League of Nations, let's say that. But when Wilson brought back the treaty to the Senate, they refused to confirm it, so they rejected the treaty. So we'll put that in as the constitutional battle over the treaty. And that concludes our discussion about imperialism in World War I. This is our review sheet, and I hope this was helpful to you. And when we meet again, we're going to talk about the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. So I will speak to you then. Have a great day.